The film and television industry is competing for everyone's time. Viewers want to see themselves in the stories that we tell. That can be by seeing faces and bodies that look like their own, and it can also be by recognizing a story that rings true to them. When we think about race as one of the many ways that people identify themselves, we should also think about how we can immerse people into these stories. Race is a hierarchy using skin color to determine who is more valuable or desirable within a given political, economic, or social system. Concepts of race are designed specifically to create in and out groups, to confer privileges and rights to those who are on the inside, and to deny those same rights to those who are on the outside. Race is entirely socially constructed. Social constructs mean things that are developed by humans to advance their own objectives. While it's true that everything's not a natural occurrence, like physics and biology are social constructions, some of those are more dangerous than others. Race as we know it was not built with any scientific basis or grounding in natural processes. In fact, many so-called scientists have tried to prove there were differences between white, Black, and Indigenous peoples. Think race-based intelligence theories, or phrenology, which looked at different skull shapes and attempted to attribute moral value based on differences in physiology. Of course, that research has all been debunked and recognized for the propaganda it was and continues to be. So where did the concept of race come from? Well, race was developed as a concept at the start of the European settler colonialism period and the transatlantic slave trade, so the late 1400s, early 1500s. And race was developed as a concept and used to make white people feel better about the horrors they were committing against Black and Indigenous peoples. People found it hard to square their actions with their morals, so a concept, race, was developed to help ease their conscience. So then what is ethnicity and why do these terms get used interchangeably? Ethnicity is built organically over time by the people living together in a collective or in a community. Ethnicity is based on community-based concepts like shared culture, language, food, dress, art, belief systems, and so on. Think people who are Scottish, Italian, Polish, Nigerian, Japanese, and so on. Ethnicity shifts and evolves over time, adapting as the people who are the core of that cultural group change and evolve themselves. So what it means to be Scottish today is connected to historical culture, but certainly different in many respects as well. Because ethnicity is about shared common cultural and community elements, it can capture individuals of all races. This is why we see people who identify as Scottish, Irish, Polish, etc., who represent all races and skin colors. Race does not determine ethnicity. Because ethnicity isn't static, ethnicity can evolve from being racialized. Take Black Americans, for example. They have been racially classified for centuries and have been excluded and discriminated against as a result of that racial classification. Black Americans who are descendants of enslaved peoples also were robbed of their own ethnic and cultural connections. So over time, a culture has emerged, naturally and organically, born of a shared experience which is rooted in oppression and collective liberation. Dress, music, colleges, a shared language has all evolved among the Black community, particularly in the US, over centuries, creating a unique situation where being grouped under a single category of Black, which didn't align to any ethnic or cultural group, eventually grew into its own naturally built cultural group with a shared history and shared experiences. Now, what do we mean when we hear the terms prejudice, discrimination, and racism? Prejudice is a belief that person or group is not as worthy, capable, or valuable as others based solely on belonging to that group. Prejudice tends to be rooted in stereotypes, generalizations about groups of people that are almost always untrue or wildly exaggerated. Discrimination is when prejudice turns into action. This is when a person is denied access, opportunity, or rights based on a prejudicial idea. Racism is when prejudice and discrimination are committed based on someone's race. Now, racism, as we speak about it in equity-based work, also requires an element of power. Because racism is so deeply built into the foundations of our society. Just think about how, for example, our Indian Act outlined the rights and privileges of Indigenous peoples in Canada, or how Jim Crow laws in the US were an attempt to maintain existing power structures even in the face of legal and social challenges. This is why we often say that racism against those who hold a significant amount of social, political, and economic power, in our case, white folks, cannot face racism. At least not the systemic kind, because the systems in which we operate aren't actively trying to oppress a group of people. So while anyone can hold prejudice against any other person, and anyone can raise discrimination based on prejudice, racism, which is built into our systems and is often referred to as systemic racism, only occurs in a top-down fashion because others simply don't have the power to build these exclusionary systems. Whether taken together or each on their own, prejudice, discrimination, and racism harm both the person who is being excluded and the person doing the excluding. They limit our full experience of the complexity of humanity by intentionally oppressing others. BIPOC people are underrepresented in the Canadian film and television industry. The most recent comprehensive survey of the Canadian film and television industry was conducted in 2022. We recognize that 82.2% of DGC members are white and 18.3% are BIPOC. Now, if we look at the Canada BIPOC population, this is 30.2%, and Alberta's BIPOC population is 35.3%. Because the FTV industry is driven by networks and who you know, a lack of diversity within the industry makes it hard for BIPOC, queer, or other underrepresented identities to gain access within the industry. When a set is filled with people who all look the same, have similar backgrounds, or haven't faced persistent and systemic racism or discrimination, cast and crew members may not even be aware of the challenges of working on set as a marginalized cast or crew member. A lack of diversity can also mean that when BIPOC, queer, disabled, fat, etc. cast and crew members are on set, the remaining cast and crew may slip into stereotyping those cast and crew members and their experiences, further alienating these people and reduces their lives to caricatures or fodder for storytelling. Ultimately, this means less rich and authentic stories are told. Less complex human experiences and emotions are being presented on screen. The cathartic impact film, television, and other creative arts can have is, at best, diminished. More inclusive art means a more authentic light being shone onto our world. So why should white people care about racism? Well, aside from just wanting to be a decent person, there are some real risks associated with racism, even for white folks. Over time, continued exposure to racism can result in desensitization and a belief that racism is natural or right or just the way that things are. This feeling can feed into the same cycle that led to the initial development of ideas about race by dehumanizing others and making excuses or allowances for violence. Seeing ongoing acts of racism can make people feel powerless to stop it, and guilty they benefit from a racist system. White guilt is wildly unhelpful when it comes to equity work. It serves very little purpose and can in turn make us afraid to do anything or fear of doing the wrong thing. White guilt recenters the experiences of white people, which again reinforces those problematic systems. When we worry about our own feelings of guilt and shame, we turn the conversation back to white people, rather than to really listening to the stories and experiences of those who are trying to educate. White guilt serves no purpose other than a brief but swift kick in the pants to get us thinking about what a more equitable and inclusive future looks like. Prolonged exposure to racism really triggers our lizard brain fear centers. Existing in a world that continues to push an us versus them mentality creates fear of the other. Living in fear of one another leads to anger and separation where there could have been growth and community. And fear and separation breed more prejudice and racism over time, making the problem far worse than it had to be. Now, not all of you watching this will be a white person, and that's great. Some of you who are white people also see racism and equity through the lens of shared humanity. So as mammals who all share a common humanity, why else should you care? Well, number one, racism limits our ability to form easy, comfortable, and authentic relationships. How can we be vulnerable with people when we can't trust them, when they've harmed us in the past, when we've been told to be fearful? Well, we can't. Racism has deprived us of untold works of art, scientific discoveries, philosophies on the world. Think about the countless Black musicians who have had their art appropriated, copied, and profited on by white folks, without credit, without attribution, without payment. Now imagine white people did respect, promote, and champion art from individuals of all backgrounds and identities. Imagine how much richer our cultural worldview would be, how much more interesting our clothes and books and music and TV shows and art and architecture would be if we hadn't lost centuries of creativity from Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. Racism has deprived us of community, shared experiences, and compassion. Racism has forced individualism on us. Racism, as mentioned previously, pits us against them and creates a world of artificial scarcity and competition that has seen white people pushing BIPOC artists, thinkers, and advocates to the side. We've lost a community connection that could make everyone's lives better and easier and richer. But individualism keeps us from thinking in collective terms. Racism has destroyed our environment and built corrupt institutions. Racism, which has its roots in colonialism, white supremacy, and capitalism, is a system of a much deeper problem. One where a small group exploit a much larger group of individuals to build their empire and their riches. And what does the desire to be Scrooge McDuck cost us all? Clean air, pristine wilderness, glaciers and ice caps, countless species of animals, and in turn, the uplifting stories we might have told about those places and those people. Racism hurts us all. It harms our creativity, it breaks down relationships, and it forces pseudo and artificial connections that require us to wear masks that are exhausting. Tackling racism brings authenticity back into every space. Every writer's room, casting meeting, movie set. No place is better for a prolonged history of racism, but every space can be better when we fight it head on. Thank you for watching this microlearning. If you'd like more information on how to improve the on-set experience of all cast and crew, please visit Screen Access Alberta.